Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Glasgow Motorway Archive podcast with Stuart Baird and John Hassel. John, how are you?
I am feeling a lot better, Stuart. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. It's good to see you. We always intended to have a bit of a break between the Erskine podcast and the others, just as we usually do in the summer, but that break was extended slightly, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And whose fault was that, John?
Entirely my own. I ended up, unfortunately, testing positive for coronavirus. I was a little bit under the weather. For anyone's really worried about me, it was quite mild. I know a lot of people have been very, very ill with it, and it is really quite an unpleasant thing to have. But I was lucky. I've had at least one jab.
Yep.
So under the weather for several days and stuff. My smell and taste isn't quite there yet, but
dear.
I thought it was a cold, Stuart, at the start, and then I was like, well, better get a test, and good thing I did, because
it was positive. Well, trust you to be the person that picks it up.
I know,
typical.
right? But I'm now a survivor of COVID.
COVID survivor. So let's apologise to the listeners, the regular listeners, for the the extended gap between our podcasts. But we're here now, and I'm sure everyone's eager for some new content. And incidentally, you're going to lead on this podcast with a topic that you love very much, and people are probably interested about.
Okay, we'll correct something. Love.
Okay.
No, I don't love it.
All right.
I'd love to talk about it. Yeah. It'd be one particular thing. But no, I'll stop being around the bush. But what I'm going to talk about is potholes.
Potholes, so like potholing caves and...
No. You The kind of things that you drive over and makes a big bump.
Those kind of potholes.
Everyone talks about it. Some of the things that people find the most frustrating thing about driving is potholes.
Yeah.
Why have I chosen to talk about this? Well, and as people listen to this podcast and probably realised, I've worked on the roads.
Yeah.
And potholes have been a kind of bread and butter of a large part of my career over the last 5 years.
Yeah. And other people will be saying, well, what's that got to do with history as well? But actually, the history of potholes and comes into it a bit as well, because people look at our old photos and go, there were no potholes in those days.
Yeah, so these new roads.
Yeah, there are reasons for that, and you're going to cover all that as well.
Hopefully. Before we dive in, I think it's good to kind of give people the gist of my stance on this and where I stand. Maybe a little bit of a disclaimer.
Yeah.
So first of all, I am not a pavement engineer.
No.
I am not an expert. I worked as an inspector for a long time. Somebody who identifies defects and everything from potholes to overhanging branches to drainage kind of things like that.
Now, you used industry jargon. You refer to yourself as a pavement engineer or not a pavement engineer.
Yes.
Now, to a lot of members of the public, a pavement is something that they walk on at the side of the road.
That's right.
So clarify for the listeners.
When we talk about pavement, we talk about the road surface.
Yes.
Okay. When we talk about what people think the pavement is, where you walk on, we often say footway instead.
Yeah.
I'll be specifically talking about potholes on the road.
Yeah.
Okay. And as I said, I worked as an inspector. I've worked mostly on motorways, but trunk roads.
Yeah.
Of all varying different types and sizes and odd junctions and things like that. And potholes actually did form quite a large component of that, and dealing with them and how we go about it. This is a big subject, and we do have some questions that people have entered later. So,
and I think the other thing that's important to state is that there's no one size fits all approach to potholes and how they're dealt with and how they're recorded across Scotland. Each of the 32 local authorities and Transport Scotland and others have their own way of dealing with potholes and identifying them. So I think what John's going to be giving you is like a broad brush description of potholes.
And in a layman's term as well. I am a driver as well.
Yes.
I use the roads when I'm not working and things like that. I am just as frustrated as these things as everyone who listens to these things and asks. But one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, I'm not going to pontificate too much and sit here and act as a defender of the industry and why these things aren't done, but just actually to provide a kind of a realistic angle on the situation and what actually happens a little bit behind the scenes with these things, and hopefully answer some questions. I'm not going to get super technical because, like I said, there are people far more qualified than me, probably people far more qualified than me listening to this, who one day would be fantastic to have them on here talking about surfacing in general. But no, this at the low level, talking about potholes is something I'm going to do.
An introduction to the subject of potholes.
So that's the angle I'm going to take with this.
Well, take it away.
Take it away. So when we think about potholes and how many of them there are, and one of the reasons why I've wanted to do this is because I see a lot of conjecture about this, a lot of people talking about it. If you ever look on Facebook, and on any article where the council has proposed they're doing something or anything, there is always at least 1 or 1,000 comments going, you should fix the roads first. What about all the potholes? What about all this and stuff?
It's a contentious issue.
It is a contentious issue, but the people aren't wrong. No. You look, people don't just say these things for any, just to cause trouble or be contrarian it. There are a lot of what I would call surface defects out there of various different things.
More so on our local road networks than our trunk road networks.
So when we were talking about, I work on trunk roads, so I can't comment too much on local roads and stuff like that. I've got a lot of colleagues who've worked on both sides, and I've worked with many different contractors who've done different things. So I've picked things up over the last kind of 5 to 6 years. With those things, there'll be plenty of people listening to this and, oh no, that's not how we do it, and stuff like that.
Yep.
So let's start with the very definition of a pothole. Now, you hear people use different terms for potholes. Like I used one, a surface defect. Another one you might hear is a depression and all these kind of things. It's a slight depression and these things. Now, some people talk about depth of the pothole, 40 millimeters. Anything over 40 millimeters is a pothole. Okay. That's not really something I agree with. Particularly because you can have very, very shallow potholes. Yeah. But to me, I've always defined it as something that doesn't feel right when you drive over it. I think that's quite fair, and that's how most people feel. If they feel it's something they've got to swerve out the way of, or when they drive over it, it doesn't feel quite right. Anything that's not of the norm of that billiard table that we expect when we drive.
Well, see, that's my take on it. To me, a pothole is any road surface defect that's not supposed to be there.
Yes.
Regardless of its depth. Or width.
Yeah, that is a hole of some sorts. Be it something that has kind of a sharp edge to it, or something that's actually a bit more rounded. Yes. To be honest with you, and I think the public would probably agree with that as well. You know, because most people driving out there aren't pavement experts and engineers. No. Myself kind of included in that to a degree. So, Stuart, the thing I kind of pose now is, you mentioned about people looking at they look at these photos and so and say, that the roads are actually they were a lot better. Why are they so bad now? Are we suffering an epidemic of potholes and these kind of things? I wonder what your thoughts are generally on the kind of the state of things out there, and I can kind of play from that.
Things have deteriorated quite obviously in the local road network in particular. I would say since the end of the regional councils in 1996.
Okay.
I think that was the beginning of a decline. Or a noticeable change in quality. There's obviously other impacts on their budgets, funding. That's obviously a clear cause of potholes and just no or limited investment in some types of roads as well, because the local authorities simply don't have the resources to be able to cope with them.
You mentioned budgets as well, but one of the things we'll get into is materials as well, as we've tried different things, and some things have worked better than others over the years when it comes to potholes, and certainly some questions also talk about traffic as well.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, we have to bear in mind that traffic has doubled since 1990. It's considerably higher even than they had envisaged in the highway plan and some of these other reports that we often talk about. That has had an effect, as has the increased weight of heavy goods vehicles. When the motorways were built, we were looking at, was it 22 tonnes?
Yes.
We're now 44 tonnes. So we've doubled the weight of the heavy goods vehicles using the roads. And, John, many people will tell you, and I believe it's a fact, that if there were no trucks or heavy vehicles in the road, there would be no potholes. Because cars in themselves, the weight of cars is not sufficient enough to tear up the road.
It's almost negligible.
Yeah.
To go off on a slight, but I think quite educational tangent, is when you are planning a road, and particularly its foundations of what it can take, you look at and can kind of construct what you're going to design and then construct based on something called the millions of standard axles. Cars do not count in any way for this. These are heavy goods vehicles.
Yes.
In particular, anything that's non-articulated being something that is going to be the most causative for a defect.
I suppose it's unfair to say that all potholes in the roads are caused by trucks. That's not the case, because you can have a lightly trafficked road that just has a crack in it or an opening in the surface, and as soon as the water starts to get in there, and then it freezes, and then you've got issues.
Yeah,
you're going to have potholes regardless.
Well, that segues nice into causes. So to me, there are I'm going to break it down into two categories of why potholes form on the road. Okay, potholes form either from below or they form from above. Mm-hmm. I will start with below first. Mm-hmm. Many of you might have noticed that you have nice, new, shiny bits of road, maybe only laid a couple of years ago, and then suddenly there's this small little pothole that's just appeared, as if overnight. Yeah. So this can be sometimes caused by like voids in your sublayers. Okay, it can be due to, particularly with new roads, that you can actually have a slight amount of settlement that happens. Roads are built up in layers. Okay, right below you get the kind of what they call the base and the sub base. Are often below that it's capped. Yeah. With what's something that they put down, then that's dependent on the ground conditions below. Mm-hmm. But then you hear people talk about the blacktop, and that's what you think of as, well, your tarmac, which is actually built up of 3 layers. Yep. The first 2 layer, the first layer, the deepest level of your blacktop is your base course. Okay, and that's made up of something called dense bitumen macadam. Yep. Then you get a binder layer, which goes between. So that's another 60 millimeters on top of what is potentially 100 or 150 millimeter base. Always measured in millimeters, these things. Yes. Which is also a kind of a dense bitumen macadam. And then you get the top, which is often 35 millimeters to 40 millimeters of what's called, used to be called a wearing course. It's now called a surface course. So it's like a cake. Yeah. If you think of a road, it's these 3 layers. Mm-hmm. So potholes can form from below by a debonding between these layers. Mm-hmm. If you get water going in, if it's not been constructed properly, when you're laying these layers down, you need to apply a tack coat to this to ensure that the layers adhere to each other. If something goes wrong during that process, you can get potholes forming. Yeah. Okay. There's also, although not something I've come across before, but you can get kind of quite miniature sinkholes in some areas where voids have formed. Yep. Which moves me slightly towards the next factor, which is caused from above. Mm-hmm. I
suppose one way that you can identify a problem from below, these issues often manifest themselves in cracking at the road surface. Longitudinal cracks, that's cracks running, away from your vehicle, so up the road.
They call this reflective cracking. Yeah. So on some bases of roads, they have a rigid base, which can often be formed by like a concrete in some cases, or a lean mix. Yep. You heard of lean mix, which is a kind of a concrete type product. Yep. And if this starts cracking from below, that then eventually reflects up the surface, and you get these big cracks going all the way through it.
And you get water coming in. Another place where you'll often see cracking of that type is where the road is maybe a very old road, and it hasn't been built with the type of foundation required to take the weight.
That's
of
right.
vehicles.
So it's a horse and cart type thing. Yeah. We'll just put some asphalt on that, and actually that thing's not designed for that. So water is your other factor. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you think of, when we talk about drainage, Stuart, we think about like gullies on the road, which are drains, and we think about ditches and things like that. But actually, you have to consider your subterranean drainage as well. Mm-hmm. That's why they build like French drains or filter drains and things on the road, the side of the road, to ensure that you've got that kind of 1.2 to 1.5 meter kind of trench, which has got a kind of a gravel type material in it, and it's surrounded by a terram type kind of. It's almost like a kind of a white material to keep the soil from these things, and that ensures that you're also draining the road from below, because water ingress beneath the road can also cause serious problems, as you can imagine, with these things. So that's some of the reasons, not all the reasons, but some of the reasons why you do get potholes forming from below. Mm-hmm. That can happen on a road which doesn't even have any traffic on it.
Exactly.
Just because the work that's been, maybe some investigations haven't been done correctly there, or you've got some kind of issue with water. Most of the time, though, in my experience, potholes are formed from above. So one of the reasons why you get this is a general wear and tear. So if you're driving along a road and, you might not see what we describe as a pothole, but the road feels a little bit rough. Yeah. In the business, we call this bituminous surface fretting. Okay. So in the asphalt is made up of a mix of obviously you've got the bituminous material, and you've got an aggregate that's with it,
Yeah.
and they're often finished off traditionally with a stone or a chip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When these start to debond and come away, you get a rough road surface which forms fretting. Now you can sometimes see these in worse areas than others, particularly where you've got more lateral movements and roundabouts and things like that, sometimes inclines of hills and whatnot. But then these can form potholes in these areas. So fretting is something that you often see over a larger area, and then potholes start forming within it. And that is a wear and tear that happens over time to roads from just generally the amount of traffic that's using it. Another reason why potholes form from above is, going back to what I said before, drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Drainage is something I'm very passionate about. If there was anything I could say that I would like to think of myself as at least a little bit specialised, would probably be drainage. But I can tell you, poor drainage on the carriageway is one of the things that causes so many problems. It is the root cause of a lot of issues. And it's simple: blocked gullies, poor drains, ditches that aren't performing correctly. You end up with flooding on the road. It makes the situation much worse because it can cause erosion.
Yep.
And Stuart, you mentioned it earlier. In the winter, when things are wet, you get freezing temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
That causes the road then to become more brittle as well. And as it still gets pounded, but we don't shut our roads in winter. It still gets pounded. These potholes bust out even more. You will notice, and everyone here will notice, that you do get more potholes in the winter period.
Yeah.
Because of that, because the water line there, the water freezing. Water and drainage is not only causing erosion, but they can also hide defects as well, where you've got ponding in areas and other things like that. And we all know those horrible kind of potholes that you hit. You don't know they're there. You go through a puddle, bang,
Yep.
They really irk me.
Yeah.
And they're very difficult to spot.
Yes.
So what you want to do is see if your drainage is sorted on the road. You won't have half the problem with these things.
It's a basic starting point. Yeah?
It is. So that's another factor. Here's another one, a slightly more unusual, but it does happen. Fuel contamination.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know, Stuart, that diesel wrecks roads?
Yes, I had heard that. Yes.
So if you've got a fuel spill from an accident or an HGV's been leaking or something like that, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
When these incidents happen, as you have to go out with a kind of a material to dissolve or emulsify this, or you have to blast it with sand.
Yeah.
Something or absorbent granules. There's many different brand names for these types of things, but fuel contamination destroys asphalt.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, in areas, and that can cause a debonding of the entire kind of surface coursing area.
Yeah.
So, moving slightly away from potholes, you can see some weird defects sometimes. Now, you might have heard of rutting. Have you ever come across rutting before, Stuart?
Sadly, yes.
Sadly, yes. Okay. It's often a big problem in hotter countries that use asphalt in places. But if you think of a field, a mucky field with a tractor that goes through it with these things, and it would form ruts. This is kind of what can happen when asphalt gets to much higher temperatures.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have seen this happen on bridge decks, and we can call it heaving.
Mm-hmm.
Is where you see a pothole. It almost looks like when you get like a crater and the sides of it come up.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the asphalt is moving and heaving up
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Something quite common on bridge decks where you have a thin surface and
Also,
something debonds.
Quite a common problem on uphill sections of motorway in lane 1 that are heavily trafficked as well, where you'll see two very clear wheel tracks, with a constant pounding of trucks and the like. Yeah.
Exactly, because you have the actual wheel tracks where things are, and that's where you'll always see these things forming.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing, you mentioned cracks. So longitudinal kind of defects that go along. If you think often on a centre line, you can have an opening of the construction joint. When we talk about construction joint, we talk about that whether you have two different bits of the surface that's been laid, and then they're basically touching each other together and they're sealed up. Eventually that seal comes away, you have an opening of the joint, and you have what is basically a long, thin, like pothole, if you want to call it that, going all the way through. Yeah. Of course, your fancy engineer would say, no, that's opening of a longitudinal joint. That's completely different from a pothole. But, a member of the public driving over that's not right.
It's still a pothole today.
It's still a problem. So I'm telling you a lot about how these things form, how they happen. So in a way, I'm trying to plead with people here. This is what we're up against, you know. Yeah. So let's move on now to talk a little bit about materials. So let's looking over your shoulder, Stuart, at some of the wonderful pictures you have in here of the M8 at Charing Cross, and a few years after it opened, and I do not see any potholes. I don't see any surface defects, let alone potholes with these things. But there is something quite different with the asphalt that was used back then. Traditionally, they used hot rolled asphalt for these roads, and generally on council roads you see this. There was a change after abroad, in Germany in particular, they came up with a different product, a stone mastic asphalt, which is a much smaller aggregate size. You didn't need to lay chips. Yeah. It was all in there already, and a machine could lay it much quicker, because hot rolled asphalt, believe it or not, it's quite a bit of skill. It's quite labour intensive to do and stuff like that. Although yes, it's robust and so on. But this new wonder product appeared on the continent. If you're much older than me, Stuart, you'll remember this. You know, going back to those days, and it did work very well in Germany. Yeah,
and then I think in the early 2000s it started to appear here, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not with a great deal of success, it has to be said. And I know the first generation of some of those stone mastic asphalt products, particularly with the larger aggregate size of 8 and 10 millimetres, a lot of local authorities in Scotland in particular were sold this wonder product as something that was going to change.
It's cheap, it's easy to lay, it's easy to take out, you know, it's strong, it's smooth, it's quiet, it's better for the environment.
And within 2 or 3 years it was all breaking up, and it was a disaster in some places. I'm thinking Edinburgh in particular suffered, Glasgow city centre had a lot of problems, and within 5 years they were going back to the old hot rolled asphalt. Because it's predictable, it's robust, it's durable.
Yeah, I mean, any engineer will know they got maybe 30, even 40 years out of it.
Did you know?
Did I know?
There is a section of the M8 between junction 16 and 17 in lane 4 that is still the original surfacing in hot rolled asphalt, and that was laid in 1970.
I do see it, and if anyone's driving on this section, you will see it because it's lighter.
Yep.
You'll notice it, you'll see it because you'll see these large white chips in it.
Yeah. And there are sections of the M77 that was completed in 1996, still the original hot rolled asphalt. However, if you look at some of these more modern products, and you think of the M74 completion of the M80, completed only 10 years ago, they're already starting to get a bit rough in places. So
what's going on there? Why has this old method been swept away and we're using this new thing? Well, we spoke about it being this wonder product. If you could imagine you're a roads boss at a trade fair in 1998 and you see this and this is all great and fair enough, you'd want to give it a try here. But like with any of these products, you get a lot of different companies and manufacturers and suppliers jumping in on the bandwagon. The quality probably won't be as consistent. The skill and expertise that they perhaps honed and perfected on the continent might not be over here, the plant. Experience is one thing. Is they've actually been doing that for a lot longer than we have. With these things, and it just didn't really work on our roads. And there were lots of different products and varying qualities, and some areas it worked better than others. But they quickly found that actually this SMA product, which by the way is laid in a thinner surface course. Now I spoke about kind of that 40 mil. What they call these products is a thin surface course system a lot of the time. And they can be laid as shallow as 30 millimetres.
Oh, goodness. I'm thinking of the E726 Glasgow Southern Orbital route here.
Yes. And they put this product down, and they did have big problems with this. As it came out. You know?
I mean, I think one of the benefits that are sold for SMA products is that they don't require so much time to cure, to harden up.
Yes.
So on a motorway or a busy dual carriageway where you can only do overnight work, where the hot road asphalt maybe needs 4 or 5 hours to harden up before you can open the road, when SME, I think it can be as low as 2 or 3 hours in some cases, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be as... Yeah, it can be. You're right in saying that. Also, it's a product as well. You can lay it in far, a lot longer sections. I mean, really, as well with kind of what do they call the kind of echelon paving systems that they can do when they build new roads. These things can be like 3 lanes wide, and that means you eliminate the need for having construction joints between the lanes in areas. So it does have its benefit. You can think of it, if you're a kind of a pragmatic guy, you can think to yourself, actually, this product is great. We can do more repairs. We can lay more road in the same amount of time.
I think a good example of that's the M8 completion project between Shawhead and Bargedy. The stretch there. There's no joints in the middle of the road or between the lanes.
Well, that is the benefit when you're building a new road. You can do these things. So they have. I'm not going to use the word maybe perfected, but they've come up with a product now that is used across trunk roads, which is the TS 2010 product.
So that's the Scottish specification for stone mastic asphalt.
It is that they use. And this has come up. We've had this discussion before, and we will elaborate on this in the future when we do finally wheel in a pavement expert here to put me right, and I can be quiet. But these systems, they're also a lot quieter. They're far more comfortable. But it is just finding that balance of where to use these products. I'm not saying SMA is bad. I'm not an SMA basher. There is a place for it, and it's particularly good on motorway sections. The jury's out if it's good on roundabouts and other areas. Not so good on
roundabouts and rigid bridge decks and that sort
exactly. Anywhere where you've got those lateral movements of vehicles turning and doing different things.
Now, something else that's interesting is that as more potholes have been seen across the country, and this is a UK-wide issue, some companies have actually developed products specifically for pothole repairs.
Yes,
products that weren't previously available.
Yes,
and there's been a whole
with a problem. This industry has cropped up.
A whole industry has cropped up just dedicated to pothole repair materials. Thinking of even some of the crack infill products that you see, and if you see long black strips on the M80, it's a good example. There's those long sections of the M80 where you'll see long running black strips on the road surface where they've had cracks form settlement as part of the new construction, and rather than rip all that up and relay it, they use these very hot products that they roll.
I've been out in jobs where they've done this even as trials, and it comes out like a kind of toffee that they put on. And then what they used to do, as far as I've been told, was they just used to fill these with a hot bitumen. But the problem you get with this is it can be a little bit slippy. But they put a kind of a high friction coating on the top of it. As Stuart says, if you look out for these things on the M80, you can see where they've sealed these cracks. It's really noticeable in America where they have concrete roads, and you do have this. You have the grey of the concrete and these screeds all over it. So,
and of course, there's other products that are intended as temporary repairs for potholes that have cropped up as well. I'm thinking there's a couple I'm aware of. There's hot versions, but there's also cold versions as well. Product names, John?
Instacrete and what was it? No, it's Ultracrete. You get there's one that's specialised for bridges, which is called Goosefix. Spelled GUSS, and that's a German product that you can
Viafix
use. Viafix is a product that's used everywhere. It's quite expensive, but it is specified. It can be, if done correctly, it can be done as a permanent repair.
I think that one gets mixed with water.
That's right. It does to make it go off.
And there's other products that just get tamped in.
That's right, like coal tar. There's so many things. It's kind of off the shelf stuff a lot of the time.
But a lot of these are only supposed to fill the hole when it's identified until such time as a permanent repair can come along. And of course, there's other options. The cheapest option for pothole filling is just getting hot tar off the back of a wagon and tamping it into the hole. And you see a lot of that on local
roads. We call that hot plugging. So sometimes when you see a lot of it, basically, you see tar that's just been flung down in a lot of cases, and you see a lot of it. That's often the case of, right, what's left in the yard tonight, boys? We've got another couple of hours here. Let's see what we can do and make the most of fixing things. It's not nice to run across, but it removes a dangerous defect. Not
properly sealed, not properly rolled, so it still feels a bit uneven. You can tell it's supposed to be a temporary fix. Okay, so that's interesting, right? So
there's all these products.
But ultimately, it comes down to why we have more potholes now than we used to. So I suppose if I was thinking about it as someone who's not really an expert in this, the increased traffic, heavier traffic, the fact that our roads are getting older,
Yes.
So a lot of the roads that were built 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah, you've got your asset management hat on.
Yep.
You can see the autumn coming in a lot of the products. Yeah.
So you're thinking, right? Okay, so really, you're thinking every 20 years or so you should be doing major maintenance on your roads to keep them in good condition and keep them operational for another 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
It can be a once in a generation thing if it's done properly. But as budgets have tightened and as the local authorities contracted and got smaller and had less resources available and didn't have the same buying power that the old regions had with regards to materials and plant and even the manpower that was available.
These are all factors
and contributed to the condition of the roads that we have now.
You're coming up with this perfect. So as you say, Stuart, it's age of these things and budgets, and we spoke about materials. You know, a lot of these different products that were tried and done over years. I mean, if you think back to the 50s, 60s, even early 70s compared to now, there's far much more road out there now.
Yeah.
And are there as many people maintaining these far more miles of road?
Not by a long way, but then of course there's much more traffic than there used to be, and getting access to a lot of the roads can be much more difficult than it used to be. You know, if you know, closing busy dual carriageways in the town centre for a week
to do repairs is always going to be a big thing. So that's going to move me on to the next segment here is the kind of pragmatism.
Yeah.
So let's all imagine me as a highways inspector looking at these things. Now, I'll tell you this, and highways inspectors won't like this, but anyone can be a highways inspector. Anyone can do it, and most motorists are. Anyone can spot a pothole.
Yeah.
But it takes a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of experience and just using your noggin to spot something before it becomes a pothole.
Yeah.
Remember I spoke about fretting? Remember I spoke about, water and drainage issues? They're the things you want to try and think and sort and get information about to get out there for a proper project to happen to actually resurface.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people think they see guys out, stamping stuff in the road and not much happening. Why don't we just go out there and just reset? Why don't we just blitz it all?
Yeah.
Comes back to what you said, a budget problem. But it also says something with the amount of traffic there. Journey time reliability.
Yes.
That's the term both you and I, Stuart, in the industry, we hear all the time. What does that mean to the public?
Yeah.
Don't put roadworks on everywhere and hold everyone up.
Yes.
People don't like being held up.
Yeah, and of course this is where the local authorities in particular can't win, because they get slated and criticised when there's potholes in the road, but as soon as you start promoting closures to deal with these problems, they get more complaints from people moaning that they can't get to Asda in 10 minutes. It's going to take them half an hour to get there on a Saturday afternoon because there's a road shut for surfacing. The local authorities really are in a difficult position, and I do feel sorry for most of them actually.
I agree with that. I don't, like I said, I don't work for a local authority. I don't know how they go for the in and outs. But going back to what I was saying about being an inspector, I don't want to sit here and be a complete apologist for the industry in a lot of ways. But as I said, if anyone can be an inspector, then why don't the inspectors just see all these potholes and then just get them all ordered to be fixed? The thing is, what makes this quite difficult, for instance, is they generally do see most of these, but a lot of the times, particularly in places where I've worked, you can't stop, look, and get out. You have to use dash cams. And for every individual, these might be scattered across an entire network as well. You then have to get back, prepare the paperwork for the night shift, and get the guys out to do it. Well, hold on a minute. All the guys are out doing the potholes that you gave them the previous day and doing other things. There's only so much resource to do a lot of these things.
Yeah, I think resourcing is probably a big factor in the.
It's massive, and it's to do with how much road space you can also book and put on in areas and stuff like that. But the aim of the game, really, from my perspective, and when dealing with these things, is just don't let these things get so bad. If you see areas failing as an inspector, you pass that up the tree to an engineer, a surfacing engineer goes, right, great, and they'll take 6 months, even to a year, to put something together, and they can resurface it properly.
This takes me back to something that local authorities used to do quite widely in Scotland, and I don't see it just so much now up here as I used to, but certainly down south in England they still do it. Surface dressing.
Yes. So surface dressing has in some ways fallen out of favour, and there are a few reasons for that. The most common one we see is what people refer to as anti-skid.
Yeah.
So this beige buff stuff.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff when it first came out. Then all these other pretenders got on the scene with different and slightly substandard products, and that's why you see a lot of it coming up now. The other reason is in some rural areas is hot tar and chip.
Yep.
Great. It'll increase the lifespan of your road surface. Not so good if you're a cyclist.
No.
With things. The other thing is Slurry Seal. Slurry Seal is an interesting product. You see them use this on footways as well. It's a very thin little layer.
Yeah.
What company I've dealt? I think Colas do these kind of products and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they can put like, it's almost like a kind of a, I'm talking millimeters of a layer.
Yeah.
And it really just kind of plasters
Seals
over those seals
up.
and scratches.
Yeah.
Can make roads look new, except they're not. Glasgow City Council done it on High Street. That's a good example. So Slurry Seal. So yeah, they do use these things, but they have fallen out of favour because sometimes they're used where they really shouldn't be used.
Yeah. I was in Wales for a week, as you know, a month ago, and on a lot of the rural roads in southwest Wales, they were doing a lot of surface dressing in the old, tam chip, method. Yeah. And there was kilometres of it being done on rural roads.
They like it on particularly like you've got just a kind of a single lane kind of type thing, narrow country roads. It's often used for. Very
effective in locations like that. Are you going to use that on an urban dual carriageway? Probably not.
No.
Although we know that some products, some newer surface dressing products have been developed that can be used in high-speed dual carriageways and motorways and the like as well. Whereas if you
just how you apply it can be quite difficult. And Slurry Seal and stuff, a lot of that you have to do with a blooming hand.
And it's all about getting the intervention at the right time. If you wait too long and the cracks have really opened up and the water's really getting in, then it's too late to surface dress or crack infill or do any of these things. It's all about getting the spend and the intervention at the right moment.
Yep.
So you get your additional 20 years
before everyone's coming in and claiming because they've broken an axle, they've got a flat tire or something like that, and you've made one of the best points I think is that intervention is actually anyone can go out there and go, oh, that's broken, we need to do this, get the guys out, let's do this. But actually you want to sort things before even one single member of the public has made a complaint about it. That's good asset management. Does that happen everywhere? No. Is it people's faults a lot of the time with things? Well, budget is something that determines a lot of these things,
And another type of road defect that we haven't mentioned so far that really grates on me.
Is it surfacing related?
It's surfacing related, but kinda. Failed ironwork.
Ah, yes. Okay.
That is so infuriating.
So when you talk about ironwork, Stuart, you're talking about manholes in the roads.
Manhole covers, gully covers.
I'm sure if anyone is listening who has at a property outside a rattling manhole cover will be absolutely shouting.
Can we
right
not
now.
build manhole covers anymore?
The problem is this, Stuart. There's something you have the design manual for roads and bridges and the spec for highway works and all these technical things, and they come out with these terms of this is spec'd for this class of traffic to go over it. They use the term D400. A lot of the time they just use this term, and that means it's fine, not realising that buses and bin lorries and everything are going over this thing on a daily basis. You can get, I use no exaggeration, the term military grade ironwork that they use in like air bases and military bases and stuff that's just absolutely bomb proof that you can put down. But it's expensive, and these off the shelf products, they just have a specification going, this is fine to use. BT, whoever go, that's what we put in.
So I'm going to throw this one out there, and you probably, maybe, you won't know the answer to it, but I'm going to throw it out there because people will think of it. Why then am I driving over manholes and manhole covers and the like from the 1970s that are labelled up as GPO, so the old General Post Office covers, predates BT, solid as a rock. Don't move an inch. And yet,
newer
Scottish water cover installed a year ago is already rattling in place and sinking. Why is that happening?
It's like a lot of things with roads and street furniture, Stuart. See, when you're building anything new in the road, you can foot and bed things so much easier within a much more forgiving timescale. So when you're building that road in the 70s, it's all clearly set out. We get this at the right depths. It's all done at the right conditions. No, cut to 2021 when BT OpenReach have an emergency call out to go to some collapsed chamber, and they've only got so many hours before they've got to do this and get on to the next job, and there's queues everywhere.
So
are they going? One, their conditions are far more difficult than that contractor in the 70s.
Yeah, they throw in any old rubbish.
They will follow a specification.
But that specification,
they're not going to get something from B&Q and go, oh yeah, use that in your patio or something. No, it would be a specification of that spec to D400, therefore it is acceptable to be used on that class of road.
I don't know. I just get the impression we just do not know how to build these things anymore, because years ago we would repair gullies and we'd put these old solid iron covers on Boness Iron Company and the like, fire them down. Still they're bomb-proof, as you say, and yet now we buy some cheap black one, painted one. Or a square cover thrown in, and months later it's all rattling and it's sinking in, and the brickwork below is rubbish, and I feel we've gone backwards.
One of the reasons they have found with gullies, and we're talking about drains, is a lot of these old covers that you talk about. Yeah, they're bomb-proof and so on, but it's not just the cover, but it's also the way that the gully pot is constructed. When you see a drain, there's a lot more to it. Yeah. But a lot of these things are particularly hard to get off.
Yeah.
Some of them in particular were more prone to blocking. So some advancements have been made. Oh, let's make a hinged cover. Let's make this with a wee grate on it. And so the guys can... So there are some reasons why to make something more maintainable, it has sacrificed some of its durability.
Yeah.
So there's all that now, how they think about, that's all very good doing that, but how do we maintain that?
Yeah.
Because ironwork's notorious for seizing.
These are the big questions that face...
And that's very difficult. And I've been in many situations where I've had to sit and choose products and go, and sometimes have to make these kind of compromises, and it is actually, that does a better job, but actually it's really difficult for us to clean it. So that's a playoff.
Yeah. I think that's a good point to start bringing in some of the questions from the listeners. Actually,
okay. We have loads here, by the way. I've had a look at some of them, and I don't know how much time we've got, Stuart, but we'll answer as many as we can.
Yeah, I've got a few here that I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
And you've given us a really good overview of this subject, and I'm sure people are probably fascinated by it. And you know what?
More questions.
People might have more questions afterwards, in which case, send them in.
Or they might say, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll come on there and tell you all about these things, and you are most welcome, because I feel... Well, I don't say I feel uncomfortable talking about this, but I know there's a lot more to this story than we can cover in what?
Oh, yeah, in an hour.
Just under an hour or something, yeah.
Exactly. Guests, always welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with this one. And it's kind of been answered already, but we'll just...
Yeah, I can elaborate.
So this was from Neil Collinson on Facebook. And he replying to the question, the request for questions. He said, this will be interesting. Would be nice to hear if the HGV weight limit increases have affected the choice of materials or the frequency of defects. Yes, I think we've kind of covered that.
We kind of have. I mean, choice of materials, I mentioned very early on, if you know that you've got a lot of heavies going on something, that means that you will have to increase the foundation layers of the road.
Yeah.
So that you don't get that deformation. As for frequency of defects, yes, they do. Yeah. Particularly on older roads, as you said, if you've got some old...
Yeah, that just weren't designed for it. Particularly local residential streets and the like. All those vans that are coming out to deliver your Amazon deliveries and the like. Years ago you wouldn't have had so many light goods vehicles even going up and down residential streets. Certainly not with the foundation layers intended for that kind of heavy use. Yeah, okay, that answers that one. So we've got another one here from Chris Kujawa.
Okay.
I hope I've said that right.
Oh, he's got many questions nestled within.
There's a couple here, so I'm going to do it in two parts. Okay, so the first part, basically, Chris asks, is there any rhyme or reason to road closures? Sometimes they close roads or lanes for weeks on end and say it's for resurfacing, but it's barely changed. Other times they seem to be able to do entire new sections of road surface overnight. So, John, you can give us an overview as to what Chris probably is seeing there.
I know exactly what he's talking about. So they were doing these roadworks way out at Whitburn, M8 Junction 4 for ages, and they had it closed for what was resurfacing.
Yeah.
And then the end product of this was a very small amount of blacktop that came out of it.
Yeah.
But the reason for this, to answer Chris' question, is that sometimes if they're dealing particularly with a bridge deck, or they even if it's not a bridge but they're doing full depth reconstruction, we're talking going down to foundation layers, because you're going deeper or you're dealing with a sensitive area such as a bridge deck, which you need to strip it out. You know all about this, and you need to reapply waterproofing, you need to have just the right conditions. You're not going to get as much road done, but because you're spending more time and love on that bit.
We need to do a podcast basically on bridge repairs, but as you say, like resurfacing a bridge deck and doing refurbishment there will take a considerably longer period of time than it is just to resurface on.
I mean, if you think about Wardy Road was a project, when they done the waterproofing on that, how long did that take?
It was about 6 weeks.
6 weeks, and how long's Wardy?
That's only about, what, 50 metres, 60 metres?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
And yet, the other part of what Chris says here is how come, they can shut and they'll go out and do nearly a kilometre of resurfacing? Well, that's just because they might be skimming off the top 40.
Exactly. And putting the same back down.
Yes, and putting the same back down. Where in other areas, you know what, we're going to take it all the way down to your base, and that takes longer because you need to build it up in layers. You need to lay that, you need to roll that, you need to wait for that to go off, you need to reapply a tack coat and put over. So, Chris, it really applies. It really depends on what kind of treatment they're doing in areas. To be honest with you.
Yeah, great. And there's a second part to Chris's question. He said, are there rules in what they can and can't do on certain classifications of roads? For instance, do you have to resurface a full section of road on a motorway to repair a pothole, where you can just quickly fill a hole on a minor road? He says, I feel that almost always the solution on minor roads is only just an emergency solution on the motorway. So I'm guessing what he means there is like, so if you get a small square patch on a motorway, it looks like a temporary repair, whereas on a local road, that would probably be a permanent repair. And there is a point there to what he says. I mean, he makes a point about filling holes in the Kingston Bridge in the past, and it seems unusual at times. He's right, there is a clear difference. We think that in terms of the specification for motorways in particular, the book would state that really 15 metres is the minimum that you should be resurfacing of a lane width if you were doing pothole repairs or issues. But in reality, again, resources often don't allow for that.
No, they don't at all. It's very common. What we call patching can be broken down if you want to get granular here, right? So you get patching, which is like a full lane width of maybe 5-6 meters or 10 meters or whatever. Yeah. But you can also get hand repairs as well. A guy will come out, he'll saw cut, he'll break, he'll use a midi planer, and he'll maybe do something that's only 3 meters by 0.9 or something like that.
And you know what? If the material around that is sound and doesn't have defects in it, then that's
never
fine.
Get rid of good material. Yeah, you always make your repair slightly larger because you will get what they call kind of crazing around defects and breakages and stuff like that. But no, don't remove road that's good.
Yeah, but obviously on a motorway you're going to do more because of the nature of a motorway, high speed, more traffic. You will do more there for safety reasons. Never mind anything else. You
do, and you plan for that as well, though, Stuart. Exactly. So while you're looking at it going, oh, that's only half a metre squared, you probably want to go, well, let's bring more material and do more.
If you've got a 30 mile an hour residential street, a small patch of a metre squared is fine.
Where defects are as well can also determine what you're going to do. And if they're in the running wheel tracks, you'll obviously want to do a more comprehensive treatment. So,
brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, I hope that answers Chris's one. I trust
we
we have more. I'm not getting out of this lightly.
No, not at all. There's another one here. This is from Twitter, from Andrew Aitken on Twitter. He says, how much of an impact does the weather have on road surfacing? Anecdotally, I find that roads tend to be the roughest in spring before more road repair works are carried out during the summer.
Weather has a huge impact on this. So heavy rainfall periods, believe it or not, lead to erosion in the fact that if you already have potholes, they can get made worse by water staying and sitting in the potholes. Also, if you get particularly cold weather, sustained cold periods, often after wet periods, that has a huge impact on it as well.
Yeah, most definitely.
Unusually, if you get very, very high heat, you can hear the roads melting, and that can lead to like heaving and rutting in some very extreme non-British conditions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right on that one. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Oh, by the way, we had a factoid from Ruth Impey on Twitter.
I like it when we learn something.
Yeah. And Ruth said the term pothole originated from potters digging out clay to make pots. There you go. She says, just saying. So thanks to Ruth for that. That's
wonderful.
Okay. Actually, yeah. Okay, I've got one more on defects before we then think about materials. And this is from someone on Twitter. Would John explain the difference between permanent and temporary pothole repairs? The latter, which seem to be used on every situation now and are never flush with the finished road level.
Yeah, okay. So we spoke about some products that are used for temporary repairs, like off-the-shelf type thing. They're cold. A guy can go out with a van and go out. A lot of the time when these temporary repairs are done, there might not be traffic management available. Somebody puts themselves at extreme risk in some cases, putting these materials out and then trying to get them tampered down before vehicles come out. Depends what organisation you work for, depends what road you're actually on, if these things can be done. But that's why you do see these temporary repairs and they look a bit rough.
Yeah.
It's because somebody has had to take a risk doing them. But he does ask, why then do we just see these left? If you know what I mean. Well, generally what happens is some of these products, particularly I mentioned like Viafix earlier, if done correctly, and these products are specified as a permanent repair, Viafix is actually great if you use it properly, and if you put the water in it and you tamper it off and you square off the edges and so on, it is good. But sometimes, these things, it can just be the conditions. Always though, these defects and their repairs are recorded. And in kind of my line of work, they do get put into a program or further works.
Yeah.
So while you see these things, it might be a while before
of course, because they're prioritised in with everything else that needs to be done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a couple for you on sort of materials rather than defects. So Eddie on Twitter asks, can't we just use concrete blocks that would be removed and replaced as required? I've also seen designs for blocks with holes all over the surface to allow quick water drainage and under road ducting for cables.
This is a kind of these things come up. I mean, there's two things here. So concrete roads were a thing we all went in for in the 80s when concrete was cheap.
Yeah.
And we thought, there was a bit of it in the 60s.
Yeah.
This is the way now and doing things, but they do last a long time. The only problem with them is if you do get defects on them, they're very expensive and difficult to repair. Now, talking about a kind of a modular concrete block system, not a continuously reinforced concrete like we often use here, but something more in America, a kind of thing you just lift out. That in reality, practical terms, you would not have the plant to do stuff like that, and if you did, it'd be very, very expensive.
Very expensive.
You'd have to batch these. Where would you get them?
Yeah.
How would you do them?
And
how would you deal with a localized defect? You're going to replace the whole block.
Yeah, and concrete production is very carbon intensive.
It is. It's not politically correct anymore to do loads and loads of concrete. As for the porous aspect, he has there's loads of different products or companies that have tried porous surfaces. It's never really kicked off on roads because it's how do you maintain the drainage beneath. The other thing is expense, but these kind of products that he's talking about, they're probably suited to car parks and things like that,
low
not
speeds,
so much roads.
And of course, concrete and exposed concrete surfaces don't lend themselves well to our climate. They're very wet and occasionally cold.
You've got to think of skid resistance, to be honest. Asphalt is great for that.
Great in places, hot parts of the world where concrete is more durable than asphalt because it doesn't melt in the heat.
Yeah.
So if you go to places in America or in southern Europe, you'll see a lot of concrete surface for that reason.
I'm always keen to learn about these new technologies, but there's a reason why they don't catch on, Stuart. It's because in the real world, these things are just the supply line isn't there to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So that takes us on to another one from Rennie on Twitter. Will asphalt mixed with waste plastic to reduce the bitumen content be the future of pothole filling? It's still possibly cheaper to buy instantly macadam just now, though. Yeah, well it is.
It's true, and it probably is. We see the decline of oil. And the price of it dropping, you'll probably see that they'll still use macadam products for a long time. I've heard a lot about plastic roads. Stuart, have you got a kind of a general thought on this before I go off on one?
It's like every contractor seems to reinvent this every year. It's like,
look at how many Lucozade bottles we've turned into.
So-and-so is working with such and such a council to relay 100 metres using recycled plastic. This is wonderful. It will be used everywhere. Then all goes quiet. You never hear about it again until the next year when another contractor and another council have decided to do it again. So I guess
if this product's a really good thing, someone's going to have to take the leap and go, actually, that's what we're going to do.
But there must be a reason why it's not,
recycling is actually very expensive, and sometimes it can be cheaper to get the other stuff. And he kind of answers his own question a little bit because he does say this. With probably cheaper to buy it. Yes, it is.
Where budgets are tight, you're going to go for the cheapest.
There is another green problem. There is microplastics that you have to consider. If you're using any of these polymer things, you need to be very careful because this stuff can potentially get into your drainage
and into water courses.
And into where do road gullies and drainage go? They outfall into water courses or suds.
Yep, definitely. So, okay, I have one final question for you.
Do we have time?
Yes, we're going to finish on a high.
Okay.
And this was from Lockabuilas on Twitter. John could tell us why one can drive for literally hundreds and thousands of miles in Holland and not see a single pothole. Why not find out what they're doing right and copy it?
Do you know what? it's the first one I'm going to say. I agree with this. We should go. We should get a road trip to Holland, to the Netherlands, and see what they're doing. And I've been to the Netherlands a few times, not in recent years. And I'm sure there are probably some defects out there, but I find that quite difficult to answer in a way. I mean, they could be using completely different products.
The climate as well.
The climate, it could be a completely different maintenance model than what we have here.
Different form of management, more resources available.
What money are they getting? What kind of traffic have they got in these areas?
How are they funding the repairs? Do they have road tolls? Are the tolls directly
exactly,
pumped
because
into
we don't
maintenance?
have road user charging here.
Exactly.
Believe it or not, your road tax doesn't go direct into... Or what is it? Like vehicle excise duty? Is that what it's
just
called?
Goes to the exchequer and then is used for
They could pay for anything with that.
Yeah.
NHS, a pension, whatever.
I think it's common in the continent that the money, the revenue generated through road user charging and tolls is immediately directed back into the road.
Into these things. So you can pay for what you get.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's a good point to make, and it's an excuse to go abroad when we're allowed.
Exactly.
So, no, thank you for that. That was quite good.
John, thank you. Very insightful. I'm sure people will find that very interesting.
I could talk about this for hours, but we don't have hours, unfortunately.
Yep.
But
that's very true. I should say, just for the record, that we're not sponsored by any of the products.
No, we didn't. We did mention a few things, but there you go. These views are really just our own, aren't they? And from our experience, it's not representative of any company. And but we thought we'd just be honest and chat about these things and let you know what happens behind the curtain. When the cones go on the road and it's late at night and everyone's in bed, this army appears and does their best to fix things.
And it's all done and dusted exactly very quickly. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this latest episode, and we will be back next month with another interesting subject. And we have quite a few coming up.
We do.
Over the next few months, so look forward to bringing you some of those. You can hear all our episodes in the usual places: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and any other good podcast providers.
And don't forget, I always say this, but social media. We've got some fantastic things coming up on that, so don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well to get a daily fix of all your road goodness. Am I allowed to say road goodness?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
And if you enjoy the work that we do, both digitising, sharing photos and these podcasts, and you want to support us, remember we do have a range of merchandise available on our online shop now. We have Erskine Bridge 50th anniversary booklets.
Oh, you need to get a badge.
We still have some badges left. They're fantastic, aren't they?
Yes.
Yep.
I picked mine up today.
Yes,
woohoo!
You did. And there's still Kingston Bridge booklets available as well. And we have one or two other surprises coming up later in the year as well. So stay tuned for those. But in the meantime, bye for now. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.